Okay, so quality. It's about fit for purpose. This is a very important element. It is about being fit for purpose. It needs to do the job it is going to do. So the point is that in starting up, the first time we get to know what the quality is, right, is in the first process of starting up a project. And that comes from the terms of reference from the business. This comes in as the mandate or terms of reference, TOR, which then triggers the start of a project process. And what's happening here is the information we need is to know what the project product is, the project product. What is it we're delivering overall? What's the objective of the whole project, the product? Right. And linked to that, we need to understand what are the customer expectations for this. So the customer quality expectations for them to make it work, right? So there are lots of things around that. For instance, if you look at a website, what's the sort of quality of the graphics you need to have, the way it's laid out. There's technical qualities as well, the speed of refresh, and the navigational qualities as well, okay? So that's all part of it. And a lot of this is to do with how much budget have I got, how much time do I need to have to get this to be built, okay? So when we look at the quality expectations, it's a lot to do with those varyings, and also, you know, how well does it need to be built, so what longevity is it going to have? And that's why we look at some of the methods, we look at what's called maintainability. So maintainability is cost of running it, but cost of maintaining it. That's why it's called maintainability, because that also has an impact on the investment. This is what the business want to know, right? What's the type of solution do I need to have in place, right? And from that, of course, right, how are we going to sign it off? So we need the acceptance criteria, right, to sign this off, right? So this is measurable. This needs to be measurable about that we can prove that it's refreshing the right speed, it's laid out properly. So there's a lot of factors here, not just the functional part, but some of the non-functional parts of it too, right? This is what we consider non-functional in the sense that it's how well is it going to work, okay? And it's quite important we know this. So this is the project product. This is what we get in at the beginning. And also linked to that, very importantly, if I get I'll try and get the brown to work. Linked to this is a technique we use called Moscow. Because, you know, part of the quality and therefore the fit for purpose means inclusion of these two, particularly the minimum usable subset. So obviously, minimum usable subset. And the role that really understands what that is going to be initially is going to be the senior supplier, right? So the real role here is the senior user, beg your pardon, guys, the senior user. This is the role that's going to know this the most, right? Supported by whoever is going to be, whether it's the client or representing the client, whatever it happens to be. The senior user will know most of this information, right? But linked to all that, of course, will be the investment, right? The investment, and that is really at the head of the project executive, who understands the business perspective and therefore how that fits into the bigger picture, right? They understand the org strategy and therefore the need for the overall change, right, etc. So, you know, they talk about the investment. When you relocate all these people, the investment is the savings you're going to have and the better working environment you're going to have. But the quality of that new center is down to the business from the user's perspective, both not just the people sitting with the bums on the seats, but the guys who are actually going to run the center and have organized that, own that part of the business. In this case, it was the back office support for all the retail branches and also the guys who are looking after all the mortgages and loans, etc. Right? So this is really what happens in starting up, right? And then when we go to IP, right, so the next thing about initiating a project is we need to understand a bit more about the project. It's about the products itself, okay? So we go into here, and to understand what the project product is, we need to break it down to understand a bit more about its components. And this is when we take product-based planning as a technique to break down the products. Right? This, therefore, takes this information and starts to help us to produce the quality management approach on how we're going to tackle the quality throughout, which will define various things. So this is the document that comes out of that, right? From the product-based planning, breaking the project product down into its smaller components, understand how we're going to manage product, which also include testing and the way you're going to develop it. All those things should be in there to a point, which is linked to the project approach, how we're going to build it and allow us to make sure we get the right quality. And therefore, looking at the methods behind it, the techniques, etc., which we then put into the project descriptions. So they go into the product descriptions, right? Which we do to start with at a high level in the main, but in detail in others. So the way that works is that really what we're doing is we're taking our project product here. So this is the project prod, and we're breaking them down into its major components. PRINCE used to call them major products. It calls them major products, the high-level requirements or high-level products, if you like. Right? So, for instance, I stick to the website because it's a little easier for everyone to understand, hopefully. So on the website, you've got a home page, products, and all the different sort of major pages. They all hang off the home page, but that's not the point. It's made up of, it's like a calendar. A calendar is made up of 12 months, and it's got all the smaller detail underneath it. But the point is that at the end of the day, they all follow a sequence, from January through to February, and so on right through to December, on the Gregorian calendar anyway. The thing is that what we're saying here, there's a couple of things coming out of this. Here's the project product and its quality expectations. This is the epic, if you like. Right? And then these are the themes, if you wish, to take that analogy here, the major prods. Right, the major products, high-level requirements, right? And then we take those, and this is where we start to put the product description together. So the product descriptions will link to here, right, for all of them across the board. And then, of course, obviously, to get a bit more detail, I usually recommend that you do this at least one level down across the board. So this goes across the board, for example, like this, and here, and whatever the next level down, right across. And you'll put the product descriptions for them as well, right? And in there, of course, part of the approach will be defining what's in the product descriptions, like the tolerances, the criteria, the methods you're going to use to test it functionally, and it should also include the business testing bit. So remember this, it's not just the functional, how it builds and works, it's how it's usable by the business. And therefore the responsibility to produce the reviewer and the approver in there, in these roles, in the product descriptions. So now getting more detail into the product descriptions. So let's just stick that in there for a minute. So we got the tolerances and the criteria for quality, right? Criteria, the methods, and then obviously the roles or responsibilities, responsibilities, right? For short, sorry. A bit short-worded here, really. And there, sometimes what we need to look at, so we need to look at the responsibilities, the specific roles, the producer, reviewer, and the approver, right, in here. But we also need to look at the bigger picture, right? So most of this information, again, will come from, the senior user, primarily, right? Support with the supplier, because the supplier will be helping to understand some of those bits. The PM will oversee it, so the project manager oversees all this, might not necessarily know all the detail. That's me thinking about being overseas, right? Overseas, that's better, there you go. So the PM will oversee all this, right? with whatever support they've got. But the senior supplier and the senior user will be the key elements that will put some of that together. And the supplier, because they'll have, the team members, for instance, team members doing this. That means team manager, team members to support to get this information in there. It's a round robin thing. It's a collaborative approach. And again, you're doing that in IP. But then when you go into controlling a stage, right? So then when we go to run the plan, right? And you're going to controlling a stage and managing product delivery with a boundary at the end. So we have the boundaries here. Then you're doing this all again. So this will happen again here, right? So at the beginning, really, it happens, I should say here actually, in the boundary. So when you get to the boundary, like you do here, the boundary here, right? You are taking that level and taking a subset of it, say here, right? And you'll take that into the boundary, and that's the bit you get more detail, right? For example, for the next stage. Next.
As part of initiating, you establish which of those topics would go forward into the next.
So, yeah, no, exactly. So the key point here is by breaking all this down, if you run through the video again, by breaking all these things down in product-based planning, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Like I said, and there's a little video that explains that. Jigsaw puzzle, you break them down into the major components and then the smaller bits around that, and maybe smaller bits of that part, and then work out, what's going to be built together, how complex is it, how long is it going to take, what are the resources I need, and then when do I need to do it compared to everything else. So you need that relationship. Again, that's the dependencies. And this is what we were saying yesterday. When you look at the original dependencies by the product breakdown here, which is the second step in the breakdown technique, right? You're seeing the dependencies for the first time. When you go back into the mainstream, you're now identifying them in more detail to understand what do I need to do, the order I need to do the work in. And that's when you can then plan this, plan the schedule. You can't put the schedule together until you've understand I've got to build this bit, then that bit, then that bit, then this bit, then this bit. Right, in that order. And sometimes it's not necessarily a functional order. Sometimes it's just, that's more tricky. I want to see if that's going to work first. Because you can build a bit, make sure it works, and then park it, right? Then you go back into the mainstream, because some things you might say, well, that's the one we've got the most risk about. Therefore, let's see if we can get that bit first, especially blue sky stuff. Let's see if we can get that bit working first, because that's the critical bit, right? Because if it doesn't, there's no point in doing the rest of the project. Right? So you do those bits first, and then you can stick it on the shelf somewhere, and then you start building the rest of it when you realize it's going to function. So, you've got to think about not necessarily the simplest bit first, it's what's most practical and most relevant. And usually the most risky bits are the ones to do first anyway. Right? So in initiating, you're looking at the overall project. You need to have the overall plan, right? So you've got the whole of what they call the project plan here, right? The project plan for its whole life cycle. And you've got high level here, for instance, these in high level later on, and this will be the detail bit here from IP at the beginning. And then when you go into the next boundary, when you're at the end of the second stage, you're in the boundary there, you'll then take the next clump that you've got for stage 3, right? And then you'll put that in detail for stage 3. So you would have, this is stage 1, remember? Remember, initiating is stage 1, where you plan for stage 2. And in stage 2, you plan for stage 3. So that'll be stage 3 planning. All right? And that's when you go through this, you take that bit again, the high level bit in stage 3, you've allocated the stage 3. In stage 2, you go to the boundary and you'll break it all down again, right? And again, this is where you're understanding the quality, who's involved in it, and it's fit for purpose because you're taking the approach on how you get the descriptions again together for that bit, relevant to the whole project product's description and its overall criteria, right? So this bit here feeds into the rest because the rest have got to be able to satisfy all that, right? And that's what you're doing really. And then of course, really what you're doing at the end of each particular stage, as you get towards the end of building this doc, you then record this information in the register. You need to call that written in the register. You also need to record it in the configuration item record. So forgive me the short version here. You need to add it to the configuration item record, and you'll have the approval records. So this is the approval from a point of view of the build. You have the approval records, and then the acceptance records. They're the business ones. So let's do that in orange. All right. So you've got the approval ones in green. Let's do that in green. Just trying to keep a techie color here, really. So the approval records are the technical output as it's been signed off, that it's functional, and that will come from your reviewer, the reviewer looking at it and proving it with the approver, right? And then underneath that, you have your acceptance, which is the business side of things. So the business has now accepted it, acceptance record, to say, yeah, guys, we've signed that off. Okay, so this information from your product descriptions on how you've done it will go into the quality register to trap it and keep up to date in case things fail need retesting. The configuration item record to show the most current version of that particular product. The approval record that's been signed off functionally, and the acceptance record that the business have accepted it, right? And that's when we have all these ID. So we have this initial ID here, and that's what we were doing when we were looking at the configuration management control, the procedure. I need an ID that goes into here, into here, into here, and into here. So they all link up together. Because at the end of the day, what you get is the product descriptions, and I should really put that in here, actually, responsibilities, and then you get the resultant product from that. Right, so that feeds, the ID goes in there, that's true, right? So that goes into there, but the resultant is that you get the product from all this work here. So the product comes into here from your testing criteria for the product description. You get your outputted product, which you then record in the quality register as being complete and why. It's got its own now version control here, how it's been approved by the build and also accepted by the business, right? And that, oops. What I just stood on. Oh, okay. Let's get out of the way so you can see that. So that basically follows the trail through, and you keep doing that in the course. At the end, when you come to the closing, whoops, sorry, closing a project, from the last one, you hand over the products, right? So you hand over the products. And what that also includes, therefore, right, this would be really the specialist products mainly. So I'll put here specialist primarily, right? It'll include all this information in here, right? And that goes up with it, right? So the product goes with it. Here are the products in here, right? And you've got all your registers and especially your CIRs and everything to go with it into operation so they can have a track of what goes on, right? So the responsibility there is for the project manager to make sure this happens, right? The project manager, as it's been signed off here by the product with these responsibilities, this will be with the team, and well, I'll put the supplier and team down here, right? The supplier and team will be doing that bit. And then down here, this will be the business. All right, which could be the senior supplier, so senior user, the senior user who will be doing most of that, or any resources that the senior user applies or provides to the business to do that, which could be super users, it could be customer users, whatever it happens to be. Okay, so making sure here, and overseeing all that, of course, will be the project executive to make sure it all fits in the bigger picture of things, right? So hopefully that just sort of gives a bit more of a view